Hello everyone, I hope you're doing alright. Today we're talking about the Defense Guardian, the spec that does a surprising amount of AoE damage but can be a little tricky if you don't know what you're doing. For this game, as usual, I'm not an expert on the spec, I'm just a nerd. I play a lot of SWTOR, but if there's anything that I miss, feel free to leave it down in the comment section below. I'm sure your fellow players will appreciate it. Alright, tertiary stats in PvE. Go for like 5,000 to 6,000 shield and then dump everything else into absorb. In PvP though, just slap a shield on and then throw everything else into crit and you should be ready to rock and roll. For our legendaries, force resistance is very boring but provides good defensive stats, so we kind of take it. And then retaliator is fantastic because riposte has no cooldown, which is fantastic. If you want to, you can replace force resistance with like a fearless victor, especially if you're going for like that big single target or AoE damage. So it's kind of up to you. If you want to go big damage, you can totally take Fearless Victor. Now, tacticals. Unfortunately, Grit Teeth is the optimal one here. It turns our Saber Ward into like a minute 15-second cooldown, which is chef's kiss. Fantastic. However, it is crafted, and so you either have to make it on your own or you have to buy it off the GTN for millions of credits. So that's kind of sad. If you don't have the credits to afford Grit Teeth, you can always run with the Get Out of Jail Free card of Life Warden, which is like your one-time use, because a lot of the tanking tacticals are actually kind of sad. For example, Horde's Strike is like, it increases your damage reduction by 2% compared to what we usually get out of Warding Strike anyway, so and it's kind of sad. Jawbreaker is like, okay, like 5 extra seconds on our warding call is nice, but not fantastic. And then our Leviathan's Hide is actually pretty decent. You could do better, could do worse, but it's just not as good as Grit Teeth. So if you don't want to save up all the credits, I'd probably go with Leviathan's Hide or just use your one-time Life Warden Get Out of Jail Free card and then roll from there. Once you have your gear in order, let's talk about our utilities. I like antagonizing assault. I'm much more of an aggressive player. I like doing big damage, and antagonizing is fantastic. Some people like marked assault. I find it to be a little weird. Some people like defensive assault for the extra damage reduction, which I don't find to be too impressive. I'd much rather take the extra crit chance. That's personally just me. I also like Cyclone Slash for the big AoE fluff when we don't have some of our other abilities available. It's just kind of my own personal opinion. With the line here, I like Critical Slash. It's going to be doing a whole lot more damage, which is very good. Some people like Guardian Focus, especially for like the big group protection. It kind of depends on your playstyle. If you like to be more defensive, you can go like Guardian Focus and Defensive Assault. I like to be more aggressive and I'm selfish, so I take Guardian Slash. Critical Defense is pretty fantastic. It's going to make our Threatening Focus be a little bit of a defensive cooldown, which is very nice, and it's going to help us get our Threatening Focus back more quickly, which is, free focus. We love to see it. Moving the line here, Battlefield Command is fantastic. Helps us get around the battlefield a lot faster. War Master is great. It gives us our Unremitting, which lets us essentially, it's a CC immunity for a few seconds, and it's going to help us use our Whirling Blade. It's pretty darn nice. Saber Reflect is awesome, generates a lot of threat. It's a Reflect, it's pretty good. And then finally, Through Peace is going to give us our focus defense back even faster. That's kind of like a default setup that I personally like to run. So let's talk about our actual job now. As the tank, it is your job to get hit in the face, all right? First, to make sure that we're the one getting hit in the face, we're going to go into our interface editor, go to our target and make sure it's enabled. This is going to make sure that anytime the boss is, engaged, you're going to know who the boss is hitting, right? We want it to be hitting us. So, for example, if I taunt the boss here, it's going to say, yes, the boss is now hitting me. This way we know if there's like a mechanic where we lose threat or, some deception sin decides that he wants to taunt the boss, we know what's going on so we can get threat back very quickly using our toolkit. It's kind of very important to have that enabled. So what is our job? Well, I said before, our job is to hit in the face by the boss, but how do we make sure that's happening? We make sure that we are getting hit in the face by the boss by generating threat. Threat can be measured through a couple of ways. The primary way of generating threat is just by straight up doing damage. So let's talk about actually, killing things as a Defense Guardian. Defense Guardian is a builder-spender spec. What that means is as you use low damaging abilities, we slowly build these stacks of yellow bubbles of focus, and then we spend those focus on high damaging abilities to, do a whole bunch of damage very quickly. Now, let's talk about ways we can generate our focus first. The first way is going to be with our Force Leap. Force Leap, jump to the target. It's very nice, especially as a strictly melee spec. This is very useful to us, and it's going to generate 3 focus for us. You can see here, don't have any focus. Leap to the target, 3 focus. It's pretty great. However, In combat, our primary focus generator is going to be our Warding Strike. Warding Strike is pretty good for a couple of reasons. First, when you use Warding Strike, it generates 6 focus. It's pretty fantastic. It means we're set up for the long run in terms of actually having focus to spend. Additionally, you're going to see here we get this little extra couple of buffs where we're going to increase our shield absorption and reduce the damage that we take whenever we use our Warding Strike. We basically want to be hitting Warding Strike on cooldown because it's going to be a great way of passively reducing our damage, and there's a couple of other benefits that we'll talk about in a hot second here. Additionally, we can use our Threatening Focus, which has a couple of mechanics here. The first is that it will instantly generate 6 focus, which is pretty great. 6 focus, can't really stick at it. Additionally, if the target is currently taunted, Threatening Focus will actually do damage to it. So if you have a bunch of enemies standing around you, you can hit like your AoE taunt, they're taunted, Threatening Focus. Oh goodness, that's unfortunate. Let's drop target here. This is so tragic that the target decided to drop. Essentially, Threatening Focus just makes sure it does a whole bunch of extra damage. So I taunt the boss here in 5 seconds. I got to fluff for 5 seconds. 4, 2, 1. If we taunt the target and then use our Threatening Focus, it'll do like 10k damage. Not great, not terrible, but it's an easy way to generate a whole bunch of focus very quickly. Additionally, because of the utilities that we take, Threatening Focus will actually reduce the damage that we take by a little bit. It's going to increase our defense chance by 10%. So not great, not terrible, but it beats a poke in the eye and generates focus, which is very good. Now, sometimes your Warding Strike or your Threatening Focus is going to be off cooldown. That's fine. We have a couple of backup abilities here in the form of Saber Throw, which will instantly generate 3 focus and do a fair bit of damage. It's also a ranged ability, so you can use it from 30 meters away. And if worst comes to worst, you can always use your Strike. Strike is a sad little ability here. It only generates 1 focus at a time. You can see here, very sad, very sad. However, it is like a filler ability. It's better than doing nothing. If you have no focus at all, you don't have any other buttons to push, you can always kind of fill with Strike until you get your Warding Strike back. Let's run that back one more time to make sure we're all on the same page. 4 sleep, 3 focus, jump to the target, Warding Strike, boop, bunch of focus, also increases our defensive chance, which is very nice. Threatening Focus generates 6 focus right away, which is very nice, and it will also do damage to taunted targets. So you can see here, taunted, did damage to it, very nice. We also have backups of Saber Throw for 3 focus, and then Strike if we run out of focus. But those are all boring. I want to actually do damage. Well, we have a couple of key abilities here that we need to talk about in terms of actually doing damage, and they all have little buffs along the way that on their own, not that impressive, but when their powers are combined, they make for a little great time. The first most important ability here is going to be our Guardian Slash. Guardian Slash on its own, pretty fantastic. It's going to consume a fair bit of focus. However, it does a couple of things. Let's start from the beginning. Assuming you have your Warding Strike up, Guardian Slash is actually an AoE, so if you use my Guardian Slash, boom, it does an area effect in all of that area. It's very nice. Additionally, it's going to reduce force and tech damage that the target does for 40 seconds. It's very nice. Additionally, it generates a whole lot of threat. It's very nice. Additionally, it's going to make our riposte essentially instantly activated. Riposte is technically only supposed to be usable after you essentially defend. The more you get attacked, the more this ability becomes available. However, anytime you use your Guardian Slash, boop, your riposte becomes available, and then we can spam it over and over again. It's very, very nice. Riposte is doing a couple things for us here in the form of, well, for one, just straight up damage. For 2, it actually has no cooldown because of the Legendary that we're taking, where it has no cooldown, which is fantastic. It only costs 1 focus, which means you can spam it over and over again. And anytime that you use Riposte, you'll get this extra little thing of defense chance. So far, we have target doing less force damage, not that much, just a little bit, and then we have the extra defense chance of our Riposte, but we can go deeper. The next most important ability here is going to be our Blade Storm. Blade Storm consumes 3 focus, and it does actually a fair bit of damage. You can see here, 10k, not great, not terrible, it's not a crit, so, it does a moderate amount of damage, but it's also going to give us a little bit of an absorb shield here. So it's going to absorb like 7k damage, which is that's not great. You're not going to like save your life with it, but it beats poke in the eye. It's 7k less damage than you have to take. It's pretty good, actually. Next, we have our Blade Barrage. Blade Barrage on its own does like a moderate amount of damage, generates a moderate amount of threat, but it consumes no focus. And when you hit it, you get 3 stacks of this extra defense chance. Additionally, we have our Force Sweep. Force Sweep is a big AoE ability here that's going to reduce the target's accuracy by like 5%. It's great for managing big packs of mobs. It's pretty fantastic. So let's run through that very quickly one more time. We have all our focus here. Assuming you have your Warding Strike up, Guardian Slash, big AoE, provides you with a bunch of defensive bucks, makes the target do less force and tech damage, very nice. It also lets you use Riposte, which generates your extra little defense chance. It also allows you to use your Blade Storm, which does a fair bit of damage and gives you a little bit of an Absorb Shield. You also have Blade Barrage, which gives you 3 stacks of your extra defense chance. And then we also have our Force Sweep, which reduces the target's accuracy by 5%. On their own, these little mini buffs that all these abilities are providing, they're not that great, right? Like, oh boy, 5% less accuracy, joy. But when combined all together, they make for a little rotating set of little buffs that help keep you alive through the course of the encounter, which is why we want to be smashing them all pretty much on cooldown. Assuming that any of these core abilities are, available, just kind of like hit them, all right? The spec is a little bit clunky. There's not a true rotation that we can be following. However, if you understand the fundamentals of like, oh, I should be using my Guardian Slash, my Riposte, my Blade Storm when it's available, my Blade Barrage when it's available, and my Force Sweep when it's available, you kind of you have the basics of it. Sometimes, these abilities all have relatively long cooldowns here. Assuming that these are all on cooldown, you kind of just fill with Slash and then Strike if you run out of focus. That's kind of all you have to know. Let's go through it one more time to make sure that we're all on the same page. Generating focus with Force Sleep. Oh, come here. Force Sleep, please, thank you. Warding Strike. Big focus generators. Threatening focus. If we taunt the target and use threatening focus, we do extra damage. It's good. Saber Throw and Strike. Backup ways to generate focus. Doing damage. Guardian Slash. Big AoE. Minor defensive buffs. Riposte. Single target damage. Very spammable. Minor buffs. Blade Storm. Costs a bit of focus, minor buffs. Blade Barrage, no focus, damage, minor buffs. Force Sweep, little bit of focus, minor buffs. And then when all those abilities are on cooldown, we fill with Slash and Strike. And that's kind of all you have to know. Essentially, hit the buttons as they become available. There's not like a set rotation here. Just you can kind of just swing it. All right? Hit those key abilities, get those little bit mini buffs, and you should be ready to roll. That's the basics of actually like controlling the damage that you do. You could be spamming your Guardian Slash and your Force Sweep whenever there's a bunch of AoE. If there's extra AoE and Guardian Slash and Force Sweep doesn't kill them all, you can always use your Cyclone Slash as kind of like a filler in between your Guardian Slashes. But other than that, that's really all you need to know about actually doing damage. But sometimes doing damage isn't enough to keep threat on the boss. Remember, this is all an exercise to try to generate enough threat so that way the boss doesn't look at and, murder our friends. We have some other extra abilities here to help us generate a whole lot of threat very quickly. The first is going to be our Hilt Bash. Now, Hilt Bash, we take our lightsaber and then we punch them in the face with it, which is, pretty insulting. It's like, Wasikta, attack me. It generates a whole lot of threat, does a moderate amount of damage. It is a stun, and it also doesn't consume any focus. It's a great little ability. It does have like a minute-long cooldown. However, it's a great way to get a boss's attention very quickly without spending, say, a taunt. Or if there's an ad that's running off in no man's land, it's a great way to get that ad's attention very quickly without having to spend our precious taunts. In a similar vein, Force Stasis generates a moderate amount of threat and actually generates 3 focus, which is pretty great. It also does a fair bit of damage. It's like 13k damage. Not great, not terrible. So you can see here, it stuns the target for a brief amount of time. It generates a fair amount of focus, and it generates a whole bunch of threat. It's pretty good. Finally, we have our Saber Reflect. Saber Reflect, we'll talk about the defensive utility in a little bit here. Just know that it causes all enemies in the area to be like, oh my goodness, Saber Reflect. That's a high threat ability. You're going to grab a bunch of enemies that way. It's a great way to generate a whole bunch of threat very quickly. So on top of all the actual damaging, straight up do damage, generate threat, we have these other options of Hilt Bash for a lot of threat very quickly. We have Force Stasis for extra focus and a little bit of extra threat. And then we have our Saber Reflect for big area of effect threat generation. But sometimes things happen, right? Sometimes a boss will kick you away and then drop all your threat and target someone else. Sometimes some deception sin will taunt the boss and then turn the boss around and make them start hitting the entire group. What do? Well, we have our taunts for that exact reason in the form of our single target taunt and our challenging call. Single target, obviously, targets one person. Challenging call affects all the enemies in the area. Taunt does a couple of things. First, it makes the target attack you for 6 seconds. So regardless of all other mechanics, the boss is now forced to hit you for the next 6 seconds, which is pretty good. But it's also going to instantly put you at the top of the threat generation. So if you sat there with your hands tied behind your back for the first 10 seconds of the poll, and then you jumped in and used your taunt, it would bump you to the very top of your current threat for the entire team. And that way it helps you in the long run, not just like get the boss for a few seconds, but it sets you up for long-term success down the road. So use your taunts kind of sparingly. If you see someone taunt off of you like a moron, DPS do that, it's kind of their thing. Or if like an AP power tech goes ballistic and pulls threat naturally, that's fine, just taunt back. Or if there's a mechanic where the boss drops threat on you and has to hit someone else, hit the taunt button, you'll get the boss back. It's kind of our, oh shoot, I lost the boss. Let me grab it back real quick. It forces the boss to come your way. We do have an extra little bit of kit here to help reduce threat for other people though, in the form of our guard and our guardian leap. Guard in PvE works where if I throw my guard on say C2 here, C2 will now generate 25% less threat, which is pretty darn nice. Especially you want to be throwing this on essentially your biggest looking DPS, the person that has the most damage, or if you have like your star parse enabled, you could just watch the damage meters and say, ah yes, this person actually knows what they're doing. Sometimes, gear can be deceiving. It's not always the person in 330 gear that's going to be pumping out the most damage. Sometimes it's the guy in like 323 that actually knows what he's doing that is going to absolutely pump. So just kind of be watching out for who do you think is going to be doing the most threat, and then throw your guard on him. He will generate a whole lot less threat. Now, in PvP, though, this actually changes a little bit because there's no such thing as threat in PvP. So to compensate, if you stand within a few meters of your guarded target, all the damage that your target not all, half the damage that your target takes will be redirected back to you. So if you have like a healer that's getting her cheeks clapped by, the 7 menacing DPS, throw your guard on her, she'll be perfectly fine. If you have a DPS, that the monkey that he is jumps into the entire group and is like, I'm hitting the smash button now. You can jump in after them, throw guard on him, and then that will compensate for all of his shortcomings. It's going to redirect half the damage that the target takes back onto you. It's going to be a very good time. Now, please don't just slap your guard on someone and say like, oh, I've done my job. Like, look around and see who's actively taking the damage and then throw the guard onto them. That's kind of your primary role as the tank, is to be protecting your teammates from their own inadequacies. So see who's taking the target or who's taking the damage, throw your guard on them, and you should be good to go. Now, we also have this option here of Guardian Leap, which is kind of funny because we have to leap to someone to reduce their threat by 20%, which is it's nice and in theory. However, in practice, if I was having the boss here and then I Guardian leapt to this person, well, I've just turned the boss around, who's now going to cleave my entire group. So like, yeah, sure, C2 now has 20% less threat. Great. And now I've just cleaved my entire group. So use this ability sparingly, but if you need to use it to reduce someone's threat, you absolutely can, especially in like down phases. It's a good way to help maintain your threat. So those are our primary ways of threat generation. One more time for the road here. It's just straight up damage, threat generation, high threat abilities like our Hilt Bash and our Stasis and our Reflect. Great ways to be generating threat. We can force the target to attack us with our taunts, and we can use our guard to reduce the threat that our teammates are generating. But as a tank, your job isn't just to like generate a whole bunch of threat. You also have to be managing your defensive cooldowns. It is your job to make the healer's job as easy as possible. Because if you just run in, you don't pop any defensive cooldowns, you're kind of throwing. You need to be paying attention to what the boss is doing and then be popping your cooldowns to make sure that you don't take a whole bunch of damage and then completely destroy your team's ability to survive, because if you die, then everyone dies, which is, not good. So, to reduce the damage that we take, we have these things called defensive cooldowns. Let's talk about them very quickly. Saber Ward is our iconic defensive cooldown, especially when combined with Grit Teeth. It has like a 1.5 minute long cooldown, which is very strong, but it reads funny, right? If you don't know what these words mean, you're not going to quite understand what's actually happening here. So let's read it together. Raise the Lightsaber Ward, increasing melee and ranged defenses by 50% and absorbing 25% of damage taken from force and tech attacks. Lasts for 12 seconds. So what does this mean? Well, melee and ranged defenses is any time you are shot with a blaster or stabbed with a saber. It's considered to be white damage. Essentially, any time that the boss is shooting you or stabbing you, it's considered to be melee and ranged damage. For example, if I hit the target here with my lightsaber, you can see it appears as white damage. This is considered to be melee ranged. And so when you use your Saber Ward, those abilities have a 50% chance to hit our ranged defenses, which is going to be very, very good for reducing our damage. However, it's only reducing force tech attacks by 25%. Well, what's force tech? Well, kind of as it sounds, force tech attack is anytime someone hits you with a force ability. So say, for example, our Blade Storm, boop, it's going to appear as yellow because it's force tech. Force tech, for the most part, is anytime you're hit with lightning, or anytime you're hit with a grenade, or anytime you're standing in fire, that's considered to be a force tech attack ability. And so Saber Ward will only reduce that damage by 25%. So it's not quite as effective on abilities on the ground or big red circles. It's only reducing that by 25%. Meanwhile, melee range damage, anytime you're shot, anytime you're stabbed, it's much more effective against that. So be aware, Saber Ward is a good defensive ability. However, it's more useful whenever you're getting shot and stabbed compared to when you're getting hit by the force or, hit by grenades. Alternatively, we have our Warding Call. Warding Call is a great little ability here because it flat out reduces all damage taken by 40% for 10 seconds, which is pretty fantastic. It's a flat 40% damage reduction, which means that all type of damage, or no matter what type of damage it is going to be reduced by 40%. It's a very strong defensive ability. Has a 2 minute 30 second cooldown, so it's a little long, but that's okay. Moving on down the line here, we have our Saber Reflect. Saber Reflect will reflect essentially all ranged abilities for about 5 seconds. Now, on top of generating all of that threat we talked about previously, it will, anytime something is thrown at you, it will reflect that damage back to the target up to like 100k damage. So anytime you're getting shot by multiple targets, anytime someone is throwing a rock at you, hit your Saber Reflect, it'll reflect that damage back to the target and do a whole bunch of damage in return on top of just generating a lot of threat. It's a great way to survive, range damage. Moving on down the line here, we have our Focus Defense. Focus Defense is a fine little ability here. It has a minute 30 second cooldown and will rapidly heal you. When you drop below 70%, you can use your Focus Defense. It'll apply 12 stacks of healing to you, and then every time you are attacked, it will rapidly heal you up pretty much all the way up to full. This is great use against like very small hits or dots where the damage isn't going to be so significant because we're going to be healing for 20k a tick. So if you're getting massively chunked, it's not going to be as useful compared to, say, if you have a bunch of dots burning on you, hit your Focus Defense, you'll heal basically all the way up to full very quickly. We'll demonstrate this when we go through our little practice here. And then finally, we have our Inure. Now, Inure is really nice and also very dangerous. Inure on its own will temporarily increase your hit points by 30%. So you see here, I healed for like 130k, 150k. That's a lot of healing that takes place very quickly. However, when the buff of Inure falls off, you lose all that health. You don't get to keep it. So it's kind of dangerous. And so what this means is that if you're at essentially under 30% health and you lose all that health, you can drop to 1 health point. So it's a little bit dangerous. So whenever you use Inure, tell your healers, be like, hey, I'm on fake health. Heal me up a little bit, get me above 30%, and then you should be safe. Inure also does a little bit here where it will cleanse you from any dots, which is pretty fantastic. So say if you're in like a Nephra, you can use Inure to cleanse yourself. It's pretty fantastic. So that's kind of our defensive toolkit here, our best opportunities for reducing the damage that we take. It's very, very strong. On top of the bonuses from Guardian Slash and Riposte and Blade Storm and Blade Barrage and Force Sweep and our Threatening Focus, which is a bonus from our critical defense here. It increases our defensive chance by 10%. Those little buffs will get you through the majority of your regular damage. When you see the big damage coming, pop your Saber Wards, pop your Warding Calls, pop your Saber Reflects, pop your Inures, pop your Focus Defense, and you should be ready to roll. Let's hop into an actual demonstration though here and then see, where we go and demonstrate these abilities in action. All right, 2 seconds. All right, so jumping into this Nim Nephro, some things that I noticed from our previous pulls that didn't go so well is that Mr. SWTOR is pulling a bunch of damage, and so I've thrown my guard on him. That's going to prevent him from generating a whole lot of threat. It's going to help me stay at the top of that threat leaderboard and not really have to worry about, who's going to be pulling off me and who is not. So, basics that we need to cover one more time. Performing our basic damaging attacks will be giving us a fair bit of minor defensive cooldowns, and then we can spend our major defensive cooldowns when we're taking damage. It's your job as the tank to learn the mechanics of the fight in a way that you understand, hey, damage is coming now, I should be popping a defensive cooldown. If you've already taken the damage, it's too late to pop the cooldown. You need to be aware of what in the fight is going to be actively killing you. So, for example, in Nim Nephro, the tanks are taking damage pretty consistently, but especially when they start to get up to like 2 to 3 stacks, that's when you really start taking some serious heat. So, be aware of when the real danger points are. Additionally, like when the dot goes out, have your instant heal to make sure that we, handle that whole dot situation with that cleanse. We will go on a little mini tank adventure here because that's what we do sometimes. Sometimes things go awry, just, handle it. The nice thing about playing tanks, and when you go on tank adventures and when things get messed up, is that the DPS don't really know. Who are they to blame you? They don't want to play tank anyway. They're terrified of getting benched to playing tank. So even if you end up going on a mini, tank adventure here, that's fine because they're playing DPS. Their opinions don't matter. You only have to apologize to your tanks and then possibly to your fellow healers. You never have to apologize to a DPS ever. They are melee monkeys. They don't have a brain. They're not paying attention. They have no responsibility. They simply exist to kill the boss and nothing else. You are the only one that actually has true responsibility, so do not take any flack from them whatsoever. All right? All right, good. Now you're going to notice here that we are effectively popping our defensive cooldowns, but we're not popping them on top of each other. This is very important because while if you pop all your defensive cooldowns at once, you will be like immortal for about 10 seconds, and then you'll die. It's very important to be only popping one defensive cooldown at a time to make sure that you're, staying alive for the entire fight and not just really staying alive for about 10 seconds. So please try to pop your defensive cooldowns one at a time. And you're also going to notice that our defensive cooldowns are coming back relatively quickly here. Like we've already popped a bunch of our cooldowns and we've already popped a couple of them twice. Well, that's because our defensive cooldowns have a relatively short cooldown, surprisingly. So don't be afraid to liberally pop those DCDs, especially in content you're not quite familiar with yet. Yes, it would be nice to optimally pop them depending on what ability is coming next, but even if you just feel like you're starting to get into trouble, pop cooldown. Please, 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 please. The important part of tanking is understanding pop your cooldowns rather aggressively rather than trying to hoard them all like Smog. If you die with cooldowns available, you'll get flamed by your healers who can flame you because they're your fellow support. But at the same time, if you die, the healer should have healed you more. So it's a little love-hate relationship between the tanks and the healers. Try to stay on their good sides because they're the ones that had to handle all your terrible mistakes. And that's really all there is to know about tanking. Sometimes you will run into some crisis management. You'll have to I lost threat of the boss. And knowing how to understand those crises is very important. If you lost threat of the boss, hit your taunt button. If you're running low on health, hit your focus defense. If you see a big hit coming, have a cooldown ready. Understanding and managing those crises is probably the most important thing about learning to be a tank, and it's learning patience. So, for example, if your SWTOR tank were to die at a very suboptimal time, making sure that you understand, okay, I need to pop my defensive cooldowns right now to make sure I don't die. I pop both of mine because this boss hits like a truck when there's no 2 tanks up. So I pop both of mine, overlap each other because it was a crisis, and therefore we didn't die, and therefore the raid continued to function. So understanding the crisis as they appear and then responding appropriately is going to be your most important task. That's really all there is to tanking. Just basically hit things, taunt when necessary, and pop defensive cooldowns, and you should be good to go. If you have any questions about tanking, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. If I can't answer them, I'll find a nerd that can. That's all I have. Hope you guys enjoy. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the last guide, or last pair of guides, for Seer and Corruption. So we'll see how that goes. You take care now. Bye-bye.